For 2 years, the night shift cashier at mile marker 47 had been the most unremarkable employee anyone could imagine. Danny Rodriguez, polite to truckers, patient with tourists, never caused problems with management. What the drug runners didn't know was why a man with his background chose to work overnight shifts at a remote truck stop. They were about to find out the hard way. Welcome to True Human Tales. Before we continue this intense story of hidden identity and highway justice, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Mile marker 47. Truck stop sat like a neon island in the Nebraska darkness, the only light for 30 miles along Interstate 80. The sign promised 24-hour service, clean restrooms, hot coffee, and delivered on all three, making it a reliable stop for long-haul truckers crossing the heartland. The parking lot could handle 40 big rigs, the diesel pumps ran efficiently day and night, and the convenience store carried everything from energy drinks to CB radio batteries to the kind of truck stop food that kept drivers fueled for the next 500 miles. Danny Rodriguez had been working the midnight to 8 shift for exactly 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Not that anyone was counting except Danny himself, who marked each completed shift as another step away from the career that had nearly killed him and definitely destroyed his marriage. At 45, Danny looked older than his years, but moved with the kind of measured precision that suggested military or law enforcement training. He was average height, stockily built, with graying hair kept neat despite the overnight hours, and the kind of weathered face that came from spending too much time outdoors in harsh weather conditions. His mile marker 47 uniform was always clean and pressed, a habit from his previous career. His work area meticulously organized and his customer service polite but professional without being overly friendly. To the truckers who stopped regularly on their cross-country routes, Danny was just part of the landscape, reliable, competent, unmemorable. They appreciated that he could make change quickly, knew where everything was located, and didn't try to make conversation when focused on getting back on the road to meet tight delivery schedules. Some regulars had been stopping at mile marker 47 for years and knew Danny only as the night guy who kept the coffee fresh and pumps running smoothly. What they didn't know was that Sergeant Daniel Rodriguez, Nebraska State Highway Patrol, had once been one of the most effective drug interdiction specialists on Interstate 80. 20 years of traffic stops, vehicle searches, and criminal investigations had given him an almost supernatural ability to spot suspicious behavior, identify altered vehicles, and recognize when cargo, routes, and stories didn't match up with what drivers claimed they were carrying. He'd been good at his job. Too good, according to some people whose illegal operations he'd systematically disrupted. Good enough to intercept millions in drug shipments, arrest dozens of trafficking suspects, and disrupt operations connecting local dealers to international cartels moving product along the interstate corridor. Good enough to make enemies who decided Sergeant Rodriguez's effectiveness was becoming inconvenient for their business model. The attempt on his life had been professional. Car bomb in his driveway, timed to detonate when he left for his morning shift. Danny had survived because his neighbor's cat had been hiding under his patrol car, and he'd spent 5 minutes coaxing it out before starting the engine. 5 minutes that had saved his life and changed everything about his future plans. The explosion had been powerful enough to crater his driveway and shatter windows 3 houses away. The investigation had been thorough but ultimately inconclusive due to the professional nature of the attempt. No arrests, no solid leads, just the understanding that someone with significant resources and criminal connections wanted Sergeant Rodriguez dead. The department had offered witness protection, relocation, desk duty. Danny had chosen early retirement and the kind of job where he could disappear into anonymity while still doing something useful. Mile marker 47 was perfect for someone who needed to disappear. Remote enough that random encounters with his old law enforcement life were unlikely, but busy enough that he could observe the same patterns of highway behavior that had made him effective as a trooper. Most importantly, it was quiet and peaceful. No sirens, no high-speed chases, no court testimony that might make him visible to people who preferred him dead. For 2 years, the arrangement had worked perfectly for his needs. Danny stocked shelves, ran the register, maintained the coffee station, and watched. He watched vehicles, patterns, behaviors with the same analytical eye that had made him effective as a trooper. He noted license plates, travel times, cargo configurations with the instincts of a career law enforcement officer. Old habits from a career that trained him to see what others missed. Most of what he observed was perfectly legal. Truckers moving legitimate freight, families on vacation, business travelers between cities. But occasionally, Danny's trained eye caught something that didn't fit. Vehicles with altered suspensions suggesting hidden cargo, nervous drivers whose routes didn't match their supposed destinations, groups of cars traveling together while pretending to be unconnected. Danny never reported these observations. His job was cashier, not cop. His priority was staying alive, not interdicting drugs. He'd made his peace with watching criminals pass through his area of responsibility without taking action. Until tonight. The convoy arrived at exactly 3:17 a.m., 4 black SUVs in perfect formation pulling into the truck stop parking lot with the kind of coordinated precision that immediately triggered every alarm in Danny's law enforcement brain. They didn't park at the pumps like normal travelers needing gas and snacks. Instead, they positioned themselves in a defensive perimeter around the building, blocking sightlines from the highway while maintaining clear escape routes back to the interstate. Danny was restocking the candy display when he noticed the vehicles through the store windows. 20 years of highway patrol experience told him this wasn't a family road trip or business travel group. This was an operation, and his truck stop was apparently part of it. The first man through the door was tall, well-dressed in an expensive suit, moving with confident stride of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. He scanned the store interior with professional thoroughness, noting camera positions, before approaching the counter where Danny stood with deliberately casual posture perfected over 2 years of night shifts. "Evening," the man said. "Quiet night." "Usually is," Danny replied, maintaining the sleepy cashier persona he'd perfected over 2 years. "You folks need gas?" "Actually, we're meeting someone here. Business associates. Should be along shortly." Danny nodded like this was completely normal, but his mind was cataloging details. The man's expensive suit, his careful speech patterns, the way he positioned himself to watch both the front door and the back office. The fact that his business associates had remained in their vehicles, engines running, ready for immediate departure. "No problem. Coffee's fresh if you want some while you wait." "Appreciated." Danny poured coffee into a paper cup, but also used the coffee station's strategic position to observe the parking lot through the window. The SUVs were positioned with tactical precision that impressed his professional eye, overlapping fields of vision, multiple escape routes back to the interstate, defensive positioning suggesting military or law enforcement training among the occupants. But these weren't cops. Danny had worked with enough federal task forces to recognize legitimate law enforcement operations, and this felt different. This felt like the other side. 20 minutes later, a semi-truck with Texas plates pulled into the lot, its engine diesel rumbling in a way that suggested a heavy load. Not unusual. Mile marker 47 saw hundreds of big rigs every week, but this one backed up to the loading dock behind the building instead of parking in the designated truck area with the other commercial vehicles. And the driver who climbed down from the cab moved with the same professional alertness as the SUV occupants, scanning the area before beginning his work. Danny watched through the security monitor as men began transferring cargo from the truck to the SUVs with practiced efficiency. Not packages or boxes that might contain legitimate merchandise, but large duffel bags that required 2 men to carry and were handled with the kind of care that suggested extremely valuable contents. The kind of heavy, dense cargo that suggested either large amounts of cash or processed drugs ready for distribution. For 20 years, Sergeant Rodriguez had dreamed of intercepting a major trafficking operation. Now, 2 years into retirement, one was happening in his parking lot. Danny faced a choice that he'd been avoiding since taking this job. He could continue being the unremarkable night shift cashier who saw nothing, reported nothing, and stayed alive. Or he could remember why he'd become a cop in the first place. The decision was made for him when one of the SUV passengers walked into the store. "We're going to need you to step away from the counter for a few minutes," the man said politely. "Business conversation that requires privacy." Danny nodded compliantly, but his hand was already moving toward the emergency button that would alert local law enforcement. The man caught the movement and smiled. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. We know who you are, Sergeant Rodriguez. We know why you're here. And we know that certain people would be very interested to learn your current location." The threat was clear. Cooperate or face the same people who had tried to kill him 2 years ago. Danny looked at the man for a long moment, weighing options he'd hoped never to face again. Then he smiled, not the sleepy cashier smile, but something colder and more professional. "You know what your mistake was?" Danny asked. "What's that?" "You assumed that Daniel Rodriguez came here to hide." Danny's posture was changing, the unremarkable cashier disappearing as 20 years of law enforcement training reasserted itself. "You didn't consider that maybe I came here to wait." The man's confident expression flickered. "Wait for what?" "For someone stupid enough to run a major trafficking operation at mile marker 47. Do you have any idea how many surveillance systems monitor this location? How many federal agencies use this stretch of highway for interdiction training? How many favors I've built up with people who are very good at making drug runners disappear?" It was a bluff, but delivered with the kind of absolute conviction that made people believe. Danny had learned long ago that confidence in authority could control situations where force wasn't available. "You're just a cashier. I'm Sergeant Daniel Rodriguez, Nebraska State Highway Patrol, 20-year veteran of drug interdiction operations on Interstate 80. I've been watching your organization for 6 months, documenting your routes, photographing your vehicles, and building a case that's going to put your entire network in federal prison." Another bluff, but the man was clearly reassessing his assumptions about the quiet night shift employee. "Even if that's true, you're outnumbered. My people outside won't hesitate to what? Shoot a law enforcement officer at a truck stop covered by state and federal surveillance? Turn this into a crime scene that will bring every agency in Nebraska down on your operation?" Danny was walking a very thin line, using psychology and misdirection to control a situation that could turn deadly in seconds. But he'd spent 20 years talking his way into and out of dangerous situations, and the skills were still there. "Besides," Danny continued, "you're assuming I'm alone. That was when the Nebraska State Patrol cars pulled into the parking lot, emergency lights flashing but sirens off. Not because Danny had called them, but because his former colleagues made regular patrol stops at mile marker 47. Professional courtesy to a retired sergeant, scheduled visits that Danny had never mentioned to his employers or customers. The timing was coincidental, but the effect was exactly what Danny had been hoping for. The man in the expensive suit realized that his carefully planned operation had just become a law enforcement incident. His associates outside were faced with the choice between running and leaving evidence behind, or staying and facing arrest with cargo that would result in federal trafficking charges. "Sergeant Rodriguez," called Trooper Martinez through the store's PA system. "Everything all right in there?" Danny keyed the microphone with practiced ease. "We've got a situation, Martinez. Multiple subjects, suspected trafficking operation, request backup and federal notification." What followed was a textbook example of multi-jurisdictional drug interdiction that Danny had participated in dozens of times from the other side of the badge. The Nebraska State Patrol secured the scene and established a perimeter. The DEA took custody of the cargo, over 200 pounds of processed methamphetamine, and nearly $1 million in cash bundled in bank wrappings. And the FBI began tracing the network connections that led to arrests across 4 states within the following week. Danny Rodriguez gave his statement as a civilian witness, not mentioning his law enforcement background until federal agents recognized his name from case files. His cover at mile marker 47 was blown, but the trafficking network that had been using Interstate 80 as their primary distribution route was completely dismantled. The truck stop manager was impressed that his quiet night shift cashier had helped bust a major drug operation. The local news treated it as a human interest story about an alert citizen. The federal task force treated it as the kind of intelligence breakthrough that justified years of investigation. Danny treated it as proof that some jobs never really end, even when you change careers. A week later, Danny received a visit from his former captain, who offered him a position as a federal consultant specializing in highway drug interdiction. The pay was better than his truck stop salary, the work would be safer than patrol duty, and it would let him use 20 years of hard-won experience to train the next generation of law enforcement officers in the techniques that had made him so effective. Danny considered the offer while restocking the candy display and watching the morning rush of truckers getting coffee before hitting the road. Mile marker 47 had been a good place to disappear, but maybe it was time to remember that some people were too good at their jobs to stay hidden forever. He accepted the position, but asked to keep working occasional shifts at the truck stop. Not because he needed the money, but because Interstate 80 was still the most effective drug trafficking route in the country, and someone needed to keep watching. Besides, the coffee was good, the truckers were interesting, and Danny had learned that sometimes the best place to catch criminals was wherever they felt most comfortable. Mile marker 47 remained a 24-hour truck stop serving coffee and diesel fuel to highway travelers. But now it was also a strategic observation point staffed by one of the most experienced drug interdiction specialists in the country. The sign still promised clean restrooms and hot coffee. It just didn't mention that it was also watched by someone who had made a career of noticing when things didn't belong on his stretch of highway. Because that's what good cops do. They adapt to new circumstances while never forgetting their core mission. Whether they're wearing a badge or a name tag, their job is to stand between good people and those who would harm them. And sometimes the most effective law enforcement happens in places where nobody expects to find a cop. This story was brought to you by True Human Tales. Have you ever encountered someone whose quiet expertise suggested hidden depths? Tell us about them in the comments below, and let us know what city you're watching from today. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to support the channel. We honor the guardians who continue serving one shift at a time.